Welcome to Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times, presented by Worth Wealth Management, a weekly conversation with area leaders about how to persevere during uncertain times. Now here's your host, Gary Shorman.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times. It's great to have you listening in and watching today and learning about weather, because if you want to talk about challenging times, it's challenged to be a meteorologist. It's probably maybe more of a challenging today to be a meteorologist than it was in some previous years. We're going to talk about that, as our guest today is National Weather Service meteorologist Jonathan Finch from the Weather Service in Dodge City. So we have some recent weather to talk about. But I want to start, Jonathan, how did you get into meteorology and wanting to be a weatherman? Because that in itself alone is a challenging job.
Well, when I was about 8 years old in Virginia, that's where I grew up, I took an interest in weather and I was just fascinated by it. And I would go outside when it's snowing and sleeting, and I'd measure the temperature, and I'd listen to the forecast and watch the news broadcast about the weather. And I knew I wanted to be a meteorologist right away. And that's what I did.
And here what you are. You've been doing this for 25 years, and you're based out of Dodge City. Talk to me a little bit. It seems like there's just in the past few weeks and months, some really weather that is just unusual in a sense of all the rains in Texas. Now I know they're going up to the north. They've been in the east. These really terrific amounts of rainfall. Is this just a different kind of weather pattern, or is this something that seems like it's new to you in your 25 years of doing this?
Um, well, we have a lot of variability here on the high plains. We have a lot of extended periods of drought, and then we have periods of wet weather. It goes in cycles. Um, so I remember some years where we had a lot of severe weather, and then other years we didn't. And it seems like every year is different. In 2011, we had over 50 days over 100 degrees. And then this year, I think maybe we've had one or two. So each year is different. And it's very challenging in that way because you just don't know what to expect. We've had a lot of surprising events over the last couple of decades. We've had significant storms in November with tornadoes, and that's extremely rare. We've had windstorms and dust storms in December, and that's extremely rare. And we had a major ice storm in the month of January. And, usually we get those late fall and the early spring. And so surprising events happen a lot. They don't always happen in the same place, of course. But every year there's an extreme event that occurs somewhere across the plains. It might be in a different spot from one year to the next. But each year has challenges, and each year has extreme events.
Seems like, our memory for those, Jonathan, is you remember that happened last week or last night. You don't remember back in 93 when all of the lakes were like running over full. Everything was just full of water because of the large amounts of rain, the flooding that took place. And it's like, well, that was cool. You can see the marks on some of the bridges. I know from Lake Wilson, you can see the mark in 1993 of that level where that was, which meant we had a lot of rain. This year we've had good rain, and that's probably because of your good forecasting, right?
Yeah, we've lucked out this summer, and we've had some very good rains. And it seems like every time we start to dry out, we get another rain. And so it's been very good.
There's one that just went through last night, and this program's going to run on Friday morning, so it would have been Wednesday evening, Thursday morning. But let's take me through the forecast of what you guys see here when that happens. I'm going to share a screen here. So if you happen to be watching on our Facebook page or our Facebook or Hayes Post sites, you're going to see what many people saw last night. I'm a pilot, so I keep an eye on these things. And it was a pretty impressive thunderhead that went up that you could see there. And so I'm going to put that up on the screen here so we share that. And work us through what you saw last night when you saw that kind of screen or that kind of storm going on, because I have some charts that I'll work along with you here, and you can tell me what you were looking at and what you actually saw when the forecast went through for that storm.
Yeah, the storm we had developed last night, the updraft was similar to this one. This is a different storm on a different day, but it's similar. You see the big white puffy cloud extending high up, and the taller those clouds get, the more severe the storm is. And so last night we had storms reaching up to around 50,000 feet. And when that happens, you tend to get high winds and some hail with the storm. And so this storm developed, it was a cold front that came down and it set off a thunderstorm in the afternoon as the sun heated things up. And once the storm developed, it moved along the front in a southwesterly direction, which is not, it's not very common direction. And so we had a severe thunderstorm coming from the northeast, and it hit Dodge City, and we had winds as high as 78 miles an hour. And when we saw this front over us yesterday afternoon, we suspected that we would have severe weather close to Dodge. We thought storms would develop, very close and affect Dodge, and that's what happened.
Well, here's a couple of the slides I'm going to put up. Initially, you looked at this weather forecast. You kind of had a big green area, but then it all started to narrow down when that started to form along the line. And you see, and some of the wording there, that a cluster of storms will likely develop later this afternoon. And again, this was Wednesday evening, and moved through the state to the north and that direction. And maybe I'm saying that wrong. Did these storms move to the north, or did they continue to move kind of to the south and southwest?
Well, the storm last night, that developed northeast of Dodge City along the front, and it moved southwestward. It was an isolated thunderstorm. And the isolated storms are the ones that are often the most severe. And in the picture you see here, that green line is where the front is, and that's very close to Dodge City. The red dot is in the center is where Dodge City is. And the red oval is where we expect the thunderstorms to develop. And this was issued a few hours before the storms. And so we try to notify people ahead of time where these storms are going to develop and which way they're going to move. And this event overachieved. We suspected they'd be severe, but we didn't really think they'd be as severe as they were. I certainly didn't expect winds as high as 78 miles an hour in Dodge City. So storms were more severe than we thought they were going to be.
And so, in reading, and here's kind of taking a look at some of that 60-mile-an-hour winds. You start forecasting that; they ended up being 78, as you said, and you try to get this forecast in place. With this chart, it shows the airport in Sublette and the changes in temperature. And the word I heard is it's really kind of new to me, is a heat burst. And what exactly is a heat burst?
Well, a thunderstorm is caused by an updraft, and you start getting precipitation, And once the precipitation starts falling, you get a downdraft. A downdraft is where you get high winds and you get cool air coming out of the thunderstorm. However, um, occasionally you can get a dry downdraft that actually warms up. And so what happened in this case, this was a few days ago, and we had a high of 94 degrees at sublet. And overnight it cooled off into the 60s. And then about 3 in the morning, there's the thunderstorm that popped up. And they had, and the temperature actually spiked up to 86 degrees right after 3 o'clock in the morning. And what happened in this case is instead of a moist downdraft, it's kind of a dry downdraft where the air, and we have very dry air in place. And so what happens is the air sinks and it heats up as it sinks. And so near the ground, the air actually warms up, 20 degrees. In some cases, it actually warms up more and approaches the previous afternoon's high temperature. And so you only notice this late at night and early in the morning when it's already cooled off, because if it's already hot, obviously you're not gonna notice it warms up because it's already hot. In this case, it's cooled off, and late at night, all of a sudden the temperature spikes up 20 degrees, and it's pretty dramatic.
Oh, that makes it interesting to try to forecast as well. Can you forecast this type of heat burst?
No, not really. We basically see them as they happen. We can recognize, when it's favorable to have a heat burst, because heat bursts, they normally occur when you have a dying thunderstorm. And so there's certain patterns where we can say, well, we might have one, but most of the time I've ever seen a heat burst, I've recognized it as it's occurring. It's very rare to pick up on it ahead of time and say a heat burst is going to happen.
So another thing that happens in these heat bursts are some of the changes in wind direction that go along with this. And tell me about this chart, because this chart in and of itself is just kind of interesting because it shows the direction of wind and the speed of the wind that go along with that.
Yes. Here is a map of temperatures that morning of the heat burst. And you see there's Ulysses there, and there's Cimarron and Spearville and Lakin. And at Sublet, it's 86 degrees, as you can see there. And if you look at up at Lakin, it's 64 degrees, and southeast of Sublet, it's 65. So on this map at 3:30 in the morning, it was 86 degrees in Sublet, but then everywhere else it was in the 60s. And you had this isolated pocket of very warm air right around Sublet, right where that heat burst was.
Well, that makes it interesting for you. Now, are you up at 3 a.m.? How do you guys do that in setting in the office in Dodge City? Because Dodge City oversees the weather for a good part of central and western Kansas, and may actually go beyond that because you connect up with some others as well. But how is that manned? Are you the overnight person, Jonathan, that's sitting there that's helped keeping us safe?
We all work rotating shift. So I'll work a whole week of midnight shifts, and then I'll have a couple of days off. And then I'll work a week of day shifts. Then I'll have a couple of days off. Then I'll work evening shifts for a week. Then I'll have a break and I'll go back to nights. And it goes, in the rotations, usually it's about 5 weeks. And so every 5 weeks I'm working nights again. And it's hard to get used to. In fact, you never really get used to it.
You've
Um,
done it for 25 years, though, Jonathan. So you obviously have a rotation in place where you can do that. Do you like the days or nights better?
um, each shift has its positives. I kind of prefer the evening shift. Um, but yeah, each shift is different. It's got its different challenges. Um, the biggest part is sleeping. It's hard. The older I get, actually harder it is to do this shift work.
But you can't sleep
I
at work, though, right?
No, we can't. Um,
I didn't.
so I
I
sleep
didn't think so. Yeah.
piecemeal. I'll after work, I'll go home and sleep for 3 or 4 hours, wake up for an hour or two, and go back to bed for 2 or 3 more hours. It's very hard to keep a good sleep schedule.
Yeah, I can only imagine. So, Jonathan, I'm going to take a quick break here. We're going to come back and talk about some of the other things that you do at the Weather Service. I know there's some wildfires that are producing smoke that are showing up now, and we see them in our sunsets. Want to talk about that. Our guest today is Jonathan Finch, who's with the National Weather Service out of Dodge City, talking about our weather and the interesting weather patterns we've had. Also, talk about all that rain. Have a great chart up here on where we've had more rain and less rain around our state. Stay tuned for that. You're listening to Forward Ever.
Since 1776, the United States of America continues to stand tall. It's been tested before, many times. Through grit and the ability to move forward, we create better tomorrows. We help our clients live their best lives to and through retirement. We make it easier. Thank you, Kansas. Worth Wealth Management, enhancing lives and strengthening families.
Welcome back to Forward Ever, leading in challenging times. We're talking about weather, and if anything can be challenging, it's trying to predict the crazy Kansas weather. And maybe that crazy weather is across our entire country. But we have Jonathan Finch on the line with us today, and we're talking about the Kansas and specifically Western Kansas, Central Kansas weather patterns that have been going on. But you guys do so much than just keeping track of storms because you track with satellite imagery and other things that show what's going on, including some of the smoke from wildfires. Tell me how that shows up and how that affects the weather.
Yeah, this time of year, they tend to get wildfires north and west of here, in Canada and across the western United States. And that smoke can go up all the way up into the jet stream, and then it flows eastward and southeastward across the United States. And so, if we have winds out of the northwest, um, aloft, closer to where the jet stream is, that's going to blow it right over us. And so, a lot of days it'll be a real hazy, and we can pick up on that on satellite. And so we can actually pick up the dust on satellite as it comes in.
Does that affect the weather or just cause things like visibility issues or
It affects
really
the
cool
visibility.
sunsets?
Yes, it affects the sunsets. It affects visibility. Um, um, and it yes, there are definitely effects on the weather as far as impacting humans. With the quality of air, um, and the visibility.
So one of the things that you'd sent me earlier was this chart of Kansas weather, and Kansas has been wetter than average over the last few months. The chart that I just picked up shows some areas that talk about the different colors. You look up, and many of our listeners are in the Ellis County, Rush County area. That looks like an area that maybe missed some of the weather, whereas down further south, southwest Kansas, there's some areas that had really much larger amounts of area. Um, Overall, what's that look like when you take a look at the weather and what that means maybe for the next few months and through the end of the year? Anything?
Well, rainfall patterns tend to be very chaotic in the summer, because we have clusters of storms that move over certain areas. And if you happen to be under one, you'll get a lot of rain. And if you happen to miss it, you won't get much. And in this particular case, Ellis County over the past 2 or 3 months hasn't had as much rain as areas farther southwest. Um, and so, although most of the area has been above average, there are some small pockets where it's been close to average, or maybe even, very slightly below average. And this kind of thing, it's very difficult to forecast, well ahead of time because we're talking about storms and they tend to be small scale. And we can forecast, it's hard to forecast exactly where these storms are going to be, even one day in advance. We can give a general area and say, well, between Hayes and Dodge City, it looks like there's going to be a chance for heavy rain tonight. And then what actually happens is we get heavy rain and Hayes gets nothing. And so you definitely can't forecast that, months out. And so you can say a pattern, well, we may have a wetter than normal spring. However, it may not be wet across the whole area. It may be wet in Dodge and it may be dry in Hayes.
So
And so
you guys have your work cut out for it. We know that. Sometimes it's easy to blame the weatherman, for the forecasts being a little, I'll use the word wonky sometimes because you get boy, it's going to really rain. And then 2 days later, you've never had that rain or you don't have any forecast for rain. And next thing you know, there's a downpour going on outside. So we know it's hard to forecast that even with all the tools that you have. The one thing you do, though, have is some additional tools for communicating the process. One, we communicate a lot of things over our post sites across Kansas, Nebraska, and Missouri that talk about that. But you like to use social media. How has that changed over the last few years, social media, and how can people participate in that?
well, it used to be when I first started the Weather Service, we were behind the scenes and we'd issue the forecast and that was it. Nowadays, we have social media. And so we make a forecast, but we also create some graphics to go with it. And we can post that on Facebook and Twitter, X, and the public can just go to our Facebook page and they can see those graphics and they can ask us questions. Um, we get lots of questions on Facebook. I say we'll post a graphic about rainfall or about severe weather, and then we'll get a question about, well, do you think that'll affect my area, or how much rain do you think we'll get tonight? And then we can answer their question. And so it's much more interactive now than it used to be, and we're not just behind the scenes anymore. And you know, we have chat rooms where we can converse with the emergency managers, and so we can fill them in on exactly what we expect to happen. And we have conference calls for severe weather. If we're expecting a major severe weather outbreak, we'll have conference calls with the emergency managers and state officials, and we'll fill them in on exactly what we're expecting. And we didn't used to have those 20 years ago. And so we have a lot more, we have more ways to communicate these days.
And don't want to dive into this very long, but down in Texas, the severe flooding that they had, and now that's extended over onto the East Coast, and it's happening up in the northern tier of states as well. That flooding thing that happened in Texas, it seems like it took a lot of people by surprise. And I think that goes into what you're saying. It is really hard to forecast those things. You probably know some people that down in that area and understand why it's so hard to do that. And have you communicated at all with them on, what did they learn from this, from the weather forecasting side of it?
I haven't personally communicated with anybody down there. Uh, However, I do know that they were expecting a lot of rain because they had flood watches out well ahead of time. But, it's the magnitude of the rainfall. Um, if you have a thunderstorm sitting on top of one area for 3 or 4 hours, I mean, you can get enormous amounts of rain. And, is that going to occur here or is it going to occur, 10 miles down the road? That's a challenge. And so, they were well aware of the potential for flooding, and that's why watches were in effect and warnings were in effect ahead of time. And so,
Yeah. Well, if somebody, what can people do to be more aware of weather? And is it just to be online, watching, listening to the radio stations, watching their favorite weathercaster on TV, et cetera? What's the best way to be involved? I like to look out to the west and see what's building, and if there's a cloud like we showed, I like to see what's coming our way. And maybe that's the pilot in me, but at some point you have to take responsibility for watching what's out there and using the tools like you provide through the Weather Service for making that happen.
well, we have a lot of the people across southwest Kansas are very weather wise, and especially the farmers. I mean, they know exactly. Um, they know Kansas weather. I mean, they live it, and they know exactly what to look for, for severe weather. And
Well, appreciate the work that you guys do at the National Weather Service. Sometimes we take for granted that you provide those weather forecasts for not only our radio stations and post sites, but you're the basis for everything that goes on weather-wise every day. So I know you have a group of people that work in Dodge City. Jonathan, thank you for being on our program today, and thank the rest of your team down there for helping keep us safe.
okay, thank you.
Jonathan Finch has been our guest today from the National Weather Service in Dodge City. We hear about him, we talk about him, we see the weather results every day, and just want to say thanks to that whole team for making it happen. And thanks to you for listening and watching our program, whether it be on our radio stations or on our post sites. Thank you for doing that. Our program is brought to you by Worth Wealth Management, where you can live with confidence. I'm Gary Shorman.
Thanks for joining us for Forward Ever, Leading in Challenging Times, presented by Worth Wealth Management. Join us right here next week for another episode with host Gary Shorman. Until then, remember to move forward ever, backward never.